mind that they must look like the same.
Not necessarily tribal or regional.
Because I have said that.
All right, thank you for staying with us. You're watching Daybreak on Trust TV. We'll be taking a look at the stories on the front pages of our newspapers. This morning, we'll begin with the Daily Trust newspaper, where we have the lead story there that says, FCT states lose trillions of Naira to unpaid ground rents. And it has the riders that says FCTA owed 34 billion Naira, recovers 2 billion Naira in 2 days. Why states are not getting ground rent? Defaulters risk revocation of titles, says lawyers. You also have above the lead story, Boko Haram kills soldier, 5 passengers in Borno ambush on page 5. Access Holdings half-year profit rises by 52% as revenue hits 940 billion Naira on page 25. And yes, congratulations to one of our own, Hamid Oegbade, Daily Trust TV. He wins Wamba Political Reporting Award on page 3. You also have above, below the pictorials, Tinubu orders rescue of abducted Zamfara Varsity students on page 3. Wike revokes more plots in Abuja, issues ultimatum to embassies, 168 others. You'd find all the details of that on page 4. And then Tribunal delivers judgment in PDP LP petitions against Sanwo-Olu today on page 8. Flood destroys 70 houses in Cross River on page 7. These are the main stories on Daily Trust cover page today.
Let's take a look at the Punch newspaper this morning. From the top of the page there, it says NNPCL swaps 2.6 trillion Naira crude for refined products. You find this on page 24. Outrage as bandits hold 21 Zamfara Varsity female students. A sad situation there. You'll find this on page 14 of the newspaper. 40 million Nigerian children from poor families. That's according to the West Bank. You find this on page 23 of the newspaper. The major story there says a $10 billion debt. CBN defaults on payment to banks and dollar nears 1,000 Naira. Rider says CBN banks to begin new negotiation over restructured dollar debts, and travelers parent grown as banks ration forex. The BDC operators advise the federal government. You find all the stories on page 2 of the newspaper. And down there's a pictorial of the Banjoku Junction along the Igbobo-Bayeku Road in Ikorodu, Lagos State. Facing flood there due to the constant rain happening in Lagos. Below the pictorial there, we see pay 2022 withheld salaries. That's according to ASU telling the government, the federal government there. You'll find this on page 7. NDLEA intercepts 4,000 kgs of illicit drugs and arrests 12 suspects. You find this on page 4 and 5. Ogun APC PDP trade words over Shagamu cult killings. You see this on page 7. Now, these are some of the stories on the Punch this morning.
All right. Now, you have also the lead story on the Guardian newspaper. It says, despite 2.8 trillion Naira subsidy, power averages 3,000 megawatts in 10 years. You have the breakdown there in the infograph. And also, Paris Climate Agreement, Nigeria and hypocrisy of polluter countries. Private sector CSOs kick as NLC decides on indefinite strike tomorrow. Wike gives Yuguda, Lambo, NCS 186 plot owners ultimatum. Nigeria has 500,000 undocumented citizens, 8,900 professional students in South Africa. Also, the knots in Tinubu's lofty debt servicing plan. You find the details there on page 12 of the Guardian newspaper. Oil theft. Navy arrests 8 vessels laden with diesel in Rivers. These are the main stories on the Guardian newspaper today.
We'll take a look at this day newspaper. From the top of the page there, it says Atiku's aide attacks Tinubu again, releases list of administration's 10 big lies in 119 days. Knocks president on false claims to plan meeting with Biden and says fuel subsidy back despite the government's silence. You'll find all the stories on page 5 of the newspaper. Below there we see France to pull troops out of the Niger following coup. Below the master it says president will revamp Nigeria's economy, boost energy sector, says the Roan, the FLNG boss. All right, we'll find this on page 14 of the newspaper there. The major story says, it also says that ACF condemns the developments. The major story says NLC insists on indefinite strike and says the federal government had enough time to resolve disputes. Business operators to government, labor incessant industrial action bad for ailing economy. They market in Nigeria. That's according to the business operators there. You'll find all the stories, of course, on page 5 of the newspaper. And below that, we have a pictorial of the King's College Old Boys Association dinner, where we see Kashim Ibrahim, we're seeing Sunusi Lamido, and even the Minister of Labour, Umahi. Now, these are some of the stories on this day newspaper.
All right. Now, on the People's Daily newspaper this morning, you have the lead story says, disquiet in civil service over forceful retirement of PAMSECs and directors. And INEC ready for November 11 Kogi Goba poll, says REC. You have organizers' workshop on violence and mitigation. Reps press for enrollment of 14 million out-of-school children. Police in search of missing EXU female undergraduate. These are the main stories on the People's Daily newspaper this morning. Now, let's get some perspectives to some of the stories on the newspapers this morning. We have in the studio our guest reviewer, Suleiman Obagaya, CEO, Sky Limit Media Group. He is editor and former deputy president, Nigerian Guild of Editors, here with us to give perspectives to some of the stories. Thank you so much for joining us on Daybreak this morning.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, let's begin with the Daily Trust newspaper's lead story this morning, talking about ground rents. It appears that the new FCT minister is very particular about the ground rents. I recall days ago how the Daily Trust newspaper carried a list of, those concerned as regards the payment of ground rents in the FCT, and it says about 34 billion Naira is being owed in ground rents. That's for the FCTA. What do you make of this move, and what are the challenges ahead, and why has it become, such a huge issue that, you have people not paying?
Well, what this underscores is the fact that human beings, especially in such climes as ours, require the process of coercion to function or behave normally. Because you see, the Land Use Act is very explicit about the fact that property owners must pay ground rent yearly on their property. But as you can see from the lead story in Daily Trust newspaper, in FCT alone, the property owners are owing 34 billion Naira. But with the process now started with FCT Minister Nyesom Wike, you can see that over the past few days, the Aegis or FCTA is recovering on average 1 billion Naira per day. Why, the question to be asked is, why did it take so long for the property owners to start paying? Must they be forced or compelled to do what is right? Talking about, even though the story is not just about FCT, talking about states, there is also the fact that, most property owners do not have much confidence in government because of issues to do with accountability. You know, in many states in Nigeria, you find that the governors operate as they want. Revenues have been appropriated or misappropriated by the governors who do whatever they want to do. They have forfeited the legislature, forfeited the judiciary in many respects. So there is a lack of confidence on the part of taxpayers in general, not just in respect of ground rent, to, you know, not to pay taxes because of reasons to do with lack of accountability on the part of our governors. You know, talking about, let's take it back to Abuja, you know, which you started mentioning. There is the factor of estate owners as well. You know, they are doing a good job in terms of developing Abuja, but the requirement as far as Aegis is concerned is that they should capture the data of each subscriber to their property. And after capturing the data, they should now take it to Aegis, which will in return issue certificate of ownership to property subscribers developed by the estate developers. But unfortunately, owing to reasons that are largely pecuniary, you find that the property owners, I mean the estate owners, hardly do that because they're interested in service charges and other charges. They feel that once they get Aegis or FCT to issue certificate of ownership, they will be losing the leverage to charge their subscribers for service charges, which in some estates can run up to 2 million, 1 million, 500,000, 300,000, you know, depending on how, which estate it is or which part of Abuja the estate is located. So these are some of the reasons.
How can this be managed?
Well,
how can it be avoided?
I think Minister Wike is showing the way that okay is doable. The best way to do it is to, you know, compel people to do it. Because if you just fold their arms and expect people to do the right thing, they would hardly do the right thing. Of course, there are people who do the right thing. But then it is obvious, given the quantum of the debt, you know, that a lot of people are simply not ready to do what is right until they are compelled to do so. So I think the Wiki formula, permit me to put it that way, is the way to go. You know, people should simply be compelled. Otherwise, the Land Use Act is very explicit about the fact that you can lose your property if you don't pay ground rent.
All right, away from that, let's touch on security, you know, the insecurity happening in Nigeria. We saw a situation whereby months ago, you know, there was an attack on the students of the University of Gusau, and they abducted these students and they were returned after about 3 months. Then it happened again just last week. Again, going out, taking the female students again, and this situation is scary because at the beginning they didn't even know the numbers. Then it turned out to be 20-something numbers, and 6 were rescued. You know, let's not even forget the torture, the trauma these people go through even after coming back, and we don't know what ideology or you know, trauma they are coming back with to the society. What is your take on that? Because people are already angry at the administration, saying this thing has happened before, so it seems they're not taking it seriously. And the president came out to talk about how these children need to be rescued. So what is your take on that? Is the administration not doing enough?
Well, I wouldn't say the administration is not doing enough. If there is anything this underscores, it is the fact that it is a direct threat to girl child education, and Nigeria has a record of 14 million out of school children. Government needs to do something different in terms of providing security, not just to Federal University Gusau, but to other institutions that are located in the fringes. The Federal University Gusau is located on the outskirts of Gusau, and merely seeing it, if you know the location, you know that it is susceptible to this kind of attacks. And those that were lucky to have escaped narrated the fact that since around 8 p.m. that day, that fateful day, they noticed some movements. They saw some bandits riding in about 50 motorcycles, and that they reported to the military about the movements, but that their peers were dismissed. They were assured that nothing was going to happen. But at the end of the day, something ended up happening. You know, I said it is a direct threat to girl child education because particularly a girl was reported to have called her father, telling her about what transpired in their university that fateful day. And the father simply asked her to return home, that she should forget about education and get married. And these are the kind of things, especially in northern part of Nigeria, that will continue to happen. You are very much aware of the fact that until lately, when I say lately, until maybe the last 10, 20 years, girl child education has not really been upscaled in northern Nigeria. Only few privileged people like you know, have been able to get real quality education, to be allowed by your parents to do a first degree, master's degree, some even PhD, some are even professors, you know. And I remember last week we have the first female professor, I think, from northern Nigeria in Bayero University, and she's a northerner, I think, from Kano State. So these are the kind of achievements we've been able to record because of the stability, relative stability in the system. Now that these kind of things are happening, definitely it is going to affect it badly. A lot of parents are going to end up withdrawing their, especially girls, not just girls, I'm telling you, even the boys. Because you can't have a situation where when your child is kidnapped, government, I won't say government folds its hand because I'm aware of the fact that government does a lot, but then government is getting overwhelmed. You understand? The number of security forces, if you take the police, for example, I think they're just around 300,000 or thereabouts. And a large number of them are engaged in guard services for private citizens, especially. You know, once you are rich, you apply to the police, they give you 5, 10, even 20 policemen to be following you about.
But as it is now, have we seen any signs, you know, with regards to the current administration on its approach to deal with the issue of insecurity? Yes, we've had a statement from the presidency, the president giving an order for the rescue of the Zamfara abductees. But what are the signs that you have seen, you know, as regards the approach of the current administration to deal with the issue of insecurity frontally?
Well, I think the first thing I will say is that the president means well, he has good intention, but then it is said that even the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So good intention alone is not enough. You should be seen to be proactive, you know, in taking measures to curtail this kind of incidences. The administration's approach to narrow it down directly to your question is positive, but then there is one reality. I don't know why, because I'm not a member of the government. I don't know why the government has not considered it necessary to at least give the military, you know, a kind of place in its executive council. In the entire Federal Executive Council, there is no single military person. I don't know why. You understand? In a situation,
which is why many people have faulted the appointment of the ministerial appointments of the Minister of Defense and for State and the Minister of Defense.
And you know, what makes it even worse, talking about the appointment of Ministers of Defense, is the fact that both of them hail from the same Northwest political zone. There is the aspect of the Northeast, which is still being bedeviled. As you can see, a story here, Boko Haram killed soldier, 5 passengers in Borno ambush. These are things that have continued to happen, you know. So I don't know why the government decided to do that, appointing 2 former governors, not just 2 former governors, but also from the same Northwest zone. Of course, the Northwest zone is being bedeviled by the issue of banditry and all forms of insecurity. But then that is not enough reason to narrow it down to just just 2 ministers, 2 former governors from the Northwest. When you can argue that, okay, when Obasanjo was the president, he appointed Rabi Musa Kwankwaso as Minister of Defense. But at that time, you can literally sleep on the Abuja-Kaduna highway, if you choose to, you can park your car and even sleep and nothing will happen to you. But what obtains today is sharply different. You know, what obtains today is that, you know, a lot of people are afraid. There are people, if you give them all the money in the world, they cannot travel by road, for example, from Abuja to Kaduna, because of the fear for their lives. You know, so I don't know why the president has chosen to do that. His national security advisor is a civilian, even though a policeman, a well-decorated policeman, no military person has been deemed fit for an appointment as Minister of Defense or Minister of State for Defense.
Perhaps it's the current administration's own way of doing away with the norm, with the usual practice that we've seen over time. People have accused the previous administrations of being controlled sort of technically or on some indirect ways by ex-generals or by former, you know, military personnel and all that. So perhaps it's the current administration's own way of saying, look, it's time up for the former military men and so on. But we cannot take away the fact that by virtue of their training, it gives them an edge when it comes to issues of insecurity, isn't it?
Yes, and especially also there is no room for trial and error. You understand? Already the military persons you are talking about have recorded unprecedented achievements. You know, for example, by December 2020, I remember.
But really, does it really matter, really? Because, again, if you think about it, the former president was an ex-general himself. His national security advisor was an ex-general himself. So, did it really impact in terms of fighting insecurity? I mean, if we had people like that in office, yet we experienced the kind of insecurity we did under the previous administration.
Well, you see, security is an ongoing issue. Once there is an onset of insecurity, it takes time and massive resources to be able to curtail it. To answer your question, I will say yes, it has impacted very positively. I was trying to cite an example with Borno State, which in December 2020 was able to conduct local government election in all its local governments. And after the conduct of the exercise, the winners were instructed by Governor Zulum to go back to their respective local governments and operate from there. And secondly, I can't remember the last time I heard of any bomb blast in Abuja or most of the states. It was the nth thing, let's say 9 years ago. You know, I remember 9 years ago, I was speaking on phone with my very bosom friend, a former editor here, Suleiman Bisella, in Daily Trust. He was then managing editor of New Telegraph. He was telling me he was rushing to Emma Plaza to collect his phone. And then he went there, collected his phone, but as he was stepping out, there was a bomb blast and he was killed in cold blood. You understand? So the fact that this kind of incidences no longer happen tells you a lot about the fact
but
that...
Isn't it the approach that has changed? Or,
yes, exactly.
Or is it that we've really dealt with the security issue? Or is it that the terrorists have decided to take a different approach? This time around, hoisting their flags in rural communities in parts of the western part of the country. In Niger, we've heard stories about how the governor has lamented and so on. We've seen the scale of abductions under the previous administration is unprecedented. Students in their numbers, in hundreds. You know, schools are being invaded and students are being kidnapped and so on. So perhaps that's just a change of strategy, not that we've dealt with the issue of insecurity.
You see, one of the issues being ignored by a lot of people is the fact that it is a partnership between the citizenry and the security services. I mean, talking about security or insecurity. You need the citizenry to also play their own part by way of, you know, volunteering actionable intelligence. I mean, information that is useful to the security services. But I remember during the last administration that you made reference to, there was a time Katsina Airport was functioning, was being used to launch attacks to the bandits operating in Katsina, Zamfara, and parts of Sokoto. But at a stage, it stopped. I made inquiries and I discovered that most residents, or rather some residents around within the vicinity of the airports, were serving as informants to the bandits. So whenever a fighter jet was taken off, some of these residents will call the bandits and tell them that, okay, a fighter jet has just taken off. So they will take over. The fighter jet will receive an intelligence that, okay, these bandits have gathered up so place, go and bomb them. By the time it reaches, it will discover nobody. So later, the intelligence services discovered that some of the residents within the vicinity of the airport were serving as informants to the bandits. So they now had to relocate to Kano Airport, further away. You understand, about maybe 200 kilometers away. You know, thereby increasing their operational cost.
But speaking about, you know, citizens not doing their part, we know citizens are taking up that responsibility right now, because just like you mentioned earlier, the students of Gusau University alerted the military saying that we saw a movement and they weren't taken seriously. So at this point, could it be that the citizens are saying, okay, we are trying to help the military or the security agents and they're not taking us seriously? Meanwhile, the bandits are taking these people seriously.
I think there are two issues there. One, in the security, they have a law that says you cannot leave your beat until you are instructed by your superior to do so. A beat is where you are asked to stay and do your work. So what this means is that if there is something happening a kilometer away, or maybe even 100 meters away, there is no way you can leave where you are stationed to do your work unless you are instructed to do so by your superior. The second aspect I will want to look at it is the fact that, to be very honest, the security services are increasingly getting overwhelmed. These are the realities of the situation. They are getting overwhelmed, and what it means is that the Tinubu administration must upscale its investment in security. Even though a lot of facts have been bandied about the fact that government has been spending trillions or billions of naira in security, but it is still a far cry. You know, the entire budget of the Nigerian security sector is not up to the budget of New York Fire Service. New York Fire Service, I'm telling you. The entire budget of Nigeria is not up to the budget of University of California. You know? So these are realities. And
yet our defense takes the chunk of it, a chunk of our budget. It takes almost the highest percentage of our budget if you check the numbers.
No, in 2021, I think it's not entirely correct, but of course, maybe last year it is true. The last year's budget, which is running up to now.
I'm saying this if you compare this with other budgetary allocations to other sectors of, you know, the system. Defense has the highest. If my memory serves me right, if you look at the numbers from what we've been seeing, it has been taking the highest because there has been a gradual increase almost every year. There's been an increase, and I'm sure that we are over 1 trillion naira. We have a budget of over 1 trillion naira so far. I mean, for the defense now in our budgets. Every year, I mean, as of the last time, it's more than 1 trillion naira.
Yeah, that's how it should be. And government should still do even more. Let me give you an example. There is an equipment, a war equipment called MQ-9 Reaper drone. Do you know how much it cost? $50 million per one. And that MQ-9 Reaper drone was the one used by American security intelligence services in killing Qasem Soleimani, General Qasem Soleimani of Iran. You understand? It's a very effective. If, for example, you deploy an MQ-9 Reaper drone, it will, I'm telling you, kill a lot of these bandits in no time. So, but then only when you need cost $50 million.
You know, due to time constraints, this is something that, like deep from our heart, we would like to dive into and talk more on. But then, yes, we hope that, of course, when we get to invite you someday, we'll talk more extensively on this particular issue. Thank you so much, Suleiman Ubagaya, CEO, Sky Limit Media Group editor and former deputy president of Nigerian Guild of Editors. Thanks so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.